and author of Women at Church, Neylan McBaine.
What a joyful, heavenly sight this is. Isn't it wonderful to be here this morning? Here we are, sitting side by side, worshiping together in the feeling of warmth and shared purpose that defines this conference. When I attended this conference last year, I had that same feeling. I marveled at how we were able to listen to men and women as our spiritual teachers, honoring our potential to be a unified community of equals. Despite these marvelous feelings, I left last year's conference feeling like there had been an elephant in this very enormous room. The elephant is here again this morning. We are right now feeling the hope and promise of unity that this conference is so good at inspiring. And yet, when I and all of us go to our local wards tomorrow morning, any man sitting next to any woman right now will have ecclesiastical authority over her. The woman sitting next to you will be unequivocally under a man's stewardship, and no man in this room will be required to observe the woman at his side as an administrative decision maker or spiritual leader. To the credit of the Faith Matters team, they invited me to address this elephant today. The purpose of thrusting us to Sunday morning from this glorious Saturday morning is not to deflate any of the goodness of today or take away from these feelings of wholeness that we have right now. Many of you may not even see the elephant. Some of you think it's sitting right next to you. But what we're going to do today is look communally at this elephant, name it, walk around it, wonder why it has 4 feet instead of 6 feet, as Terrell asked yesterday. And in doing so, we are going to knit together our Saturday and Sunday experiences. We're going to create some new connective tissue that binds our experience this morning with what we bring to our Sunday institutional experience. It is my hope that you leave this morning with the perspective and tools that you need to walk into your chapel with renewed love for our community and new tools with which to build it. Let me take a minute to look back and explain how I personally came to be delivering this message this morning. 12 years ago, almost to the day, in this very room, I spoke to a Latter-day Saint conference not unlike this one. As I was speaking, ushers went up and down the aisles collecting note cards on which participants had written questions they wished me to address in the Q&A. After I finished my prepared remarks, I was handed the stack of note cards while I was still standing on stage here, and I looked down at the note card on the top of the pile and read to myself what was written there. You are an apostate. What had I said that had angered at least one person in that audience? Here was the thesis of that talk. There is a tremendous amount of pain among our women regarding how they can or cannot contribute to the governance of our ecclesiastical organization. We need to pay attention to that pain. At that point in 2012, I had already spent years gathering and studying the stories of Latter-day Saint women. I had founded the Mormon Women Project, now the Latter-day Saint Women Project, where we published lengthy interviews with hundreds of LDS women from around the world. I'd written numerous articles, conducted surveys, participated in conferences, and ironically, I had been recommended by the church's own public affairs department to speak at that conference on that day. But in 2012, when I gave that talk, one thing was obvious. There was still a lot of work to be done in acknowledging that the church is, by definition, a patriarchal organization, meaning we function within a structure that objectively gives greater responsibility, authority, and visibility to men over women. We as a people were not yet comfortable acknowledging that favoring men limits women's contribution to decision-making and administration, overlooking their perspectives and sometimes hindering their personal growth. 2 years later, in 2014, I turned my original 2012 talk into a full-length book, Women at Church, Magnifying LDS Women's Local Impact, which was published exactly 10 years ago this summer. The thesis here was similar. This book is predicated on a single belief, that there is much more we can do to see, hear, and include women at church. We are not doing all we can to fully recognize and utilize women's unique voices, experiences, opinions, and abilities, and it is imperative that we do better. I spent the first third of the book addressing mainstream members who may not have ever considered the impact of our patriarchal organization or felt its effects in their lives. We swim so entirely in the waters of patriarchy that many of us do not see the extent to which our organizational structure, the language we use, our understanding of God, our quoting of spiritual authorities, our visual representations in our meetings, and the stories of our scriptures center the experiences and viewpoints of men. At that time, there were many who felt that discussing these facts was unfaithful or dangerous. You may still feel that way today. I tried to speak to that audience, encouraging compassion for the cognitive dissonance modern Latter-day Saint women experience, straddling both their church community and the other communities in which we live. I encouraged us to name patriarchy, to acknowledge how different its goals and rules are from every other system that governs us in this country in this day. Even for those of you who believe that our patriarchal organization is aligned with divine will and should not or will not ever change, wrestling with its existence and its impacts is imperative for intellectual honesty and spiritual integrity. The cover of the book, this magnificent painting by Caitlin Connolly, illustrates the tensions that are inherent in many Latter-day Saint women's lives today. We wrestle with obedience, often in tension with personal agency. The actualization of ourselves in the world is contrasted with the roles we play within the church. These dissonances are a fact of life for many Latter-day Saint women. I believed then, and I still believe, that we as members of the church have more agency than we realize to shape our experiences at the local level. And so the second half of the book is dedicated to specific handbook-approved ways that we can all do more to amplify the voices and visibility and contributions of women in our local wards and stakes. The church organization may be textbook patriarchy, but we can all work to blur the lines in our own local and personal levels. Even though legions of women before me had highlighted similar points, many of whom are here in the audience today and whom I honor, there was something about that book, how I said it, the cultural zeitgeist of that moment, that produced a particular lighting of a fuse. The online talk from 2012 was read on for hundreds of thousands of times, and the book was hailed by commentators as one of the most important Latter-day Saint books of the 21st century. So what has changed in the past 10 years? For me personally, the past 10 years have been both encouraging and heartbreaking. There is the part of me that loves to celebrate the wins, as I'm sure you do too, the part that recognizes that every small improvement we make softens the grounds and plants the seeds for future growth. And there have been significant reasons to celebrate over the past 10 years. I'm sure you have seen these as I have. Just one recent example, up until a couple of weeks ago, I would have said that there had been no major change in the visibility of women in our Sunday experience. Sacrament meetings can still entirely consist of male participants without a single woman visible, participating, or even needed. But recent changes to the handbook indicated that the young women should now take a visible role in setting the tone for sacrament meeting by serving as official greeters. This is the first effort. That deserves an applause, I agree. This is the first effort I have seen to officially introduce women into the fabric of our sacrament meetings. Many thoughtful local leaders have been doing this informally for years, such as my own bishop, who insists high counselors bring a female stake leader with them when they come speak in our ward. But this is the first time there has been an assigned role for girls or women in our Sunday worship. Through small official adjustments like this, I've seen an openness and a willingness to engage in this conversation that did not exist 10 years ago. Rather than calling me an apostate, I bet a lot of you here have done something similar in your own sphere of influence. You've tried something to increase the visibility and participation of women. You've scheduled women to close sacrament meetings rather than letting men always have the final word. You've made a point of quoting women, leaders, or just your next door neighbor. You've welcomed mothers to hold their babies and while they are blessed, and you've invited the Relief Society presidency to teach elders quorum. No calling is too small to center women and women's experiences. In my ward right now, I'm creating the program. I make an effort to put paintings of women on the covers, and I seek out lesser-known female artists. If you need some ideas for your own ward, please visit our wonderful artists outside. There's so many who represent and center the women's experience. And just last week, a woman in my ward bore her testimony, not knowing I was the one who had put the image on the cover, of how much one of the paintings that was on the cover of our program meant to her. She saw someone who looked like her on the cover of our program, and it boosted her testimony in a very difficult time. Additionally, you may have listened to the excellent podcasts or followed some of the Instagram accounts that center women's experience in the church, outlets that didn't remotely exist 10 years ago, but which now offer valuable analysis and provide communities of like-minded people who let us know we are not alone. For me, as someone observing this conversation around women at church for almost 2 decades now, this has been the greatest shift of the past 10 years. More open hearts, greater willingness to see things from other perspectives, deeper imagination when it comes to our personal stewardships. We seem to understand better that we no longer need to buy into patriarchy, hook, line, and sinker, or else walk away in anger. We are more curious about the idea that naming patriarchy, examining it, questioning it, studying its impact in our lives actually leads to a bridge between those two extremes, a way of navigating our membership in the church that is healthy and flexible. This shift has been especially apparent to me among our women. 10 years ago, I noted that it was our women more often than our men who pushed back on the need to openly and honestly talk about women's participation in the church. I heard all of the common refrains. Why would I want more responsibility? I have all the influence I need through my husband. Men have priesthood, women have motherhood. I estimated that I heard from men sympathetic to my message about 4 times more often than I heard from women. I understood that it could be painful to confront the reality that all of the love and appreciation and praise and talk of angel motherhood we enjoy is not a quality. To recognize that shying away from church governance because you're a woman is the only time in the church when doing less, being less, contributing less is considered admirable. Being put on a pedestal lifts us away from the grounding gravity of self-worth. But there is a new voice now, a voice that rose up in the tens of thousands recently to push back on an Instagram post that felt out of touch with the dissonance we live with. There is a voice now that recognizes that visibility isn't vain, contribution isn't corrupting. This is exciting. In the absence of institutional parity, so many individuals have worked to honor their own vision of Zion by taking small but powerful action. This has been extremely moving to watch. For all of you here who have sought to elevate a sister, a daughter, a wife, or a friend, I thank you. As the mother of 3 daughters, I thank you. As someone who has watched countless loved ones step away from the church because they don't see the very best of humanity reflected in our practices, I thank you. And I feel confident that the Savior Jesus Christ, who upended gender norms in revolutionary ways during his own lifetime, thanks you too. But there's the heartbroken part of me too. It's the part that recently read the beautiful 50th anniversary issue of the Exponent 2 magazine and considered the context of its founding in 1974. It's the part that recognizes that when it comes to gender parity, the chasm between what our children experience at church and what they experience in every other part of their lives is probably greater now than it ever has been. We are so steeped in patriarchal practices, we might not even see how bizarre we appear from the outside or how much these practices hurt our missionary work and tear at the fabric of our community. Just last month, one mother wrote in an email, "How do I explain away the sexist organizational structure that strikes all my children as blatant, ridiculous, and almost comical?" I have been personally heartbroken over the past 10 years by the stories of local leaders, men and women who have tried things I advocated for in my book, such as letting the ward's female leaders sit on the stand in sacrament meeting, or calling a woman to plan the sacrament meeting programs. And I have watched these things be shut down from higher level leadership. My own daughter was called as a co-Sunday school president in her ward, only to have the title revoked later by the stake president. While the bishop's impulse to call her to this role and his communication around the calling was done with the utmost care and consideration, she was crushed, not because she coveted a title, but because she recognized the larger significance of this single small instance of change. I mourned with her, and I have mourned with you. One of the most pernicious and frustrating elements for me is the phenomenon of leadership roulette. One man will let a woman do something while another man will not. Here in Utah, wards across the street from each other can have entirely different vibes when it comes to the governance of women. The emotional whiplash of, will he allow this or can she do that, is part of what is so exhausting for us. When I was 14, I decided to go on a weekend youth temple trip, even though I was having my period. At that time, young women were not permitted to participate in baptisms for the dead if they were menstruating, even if they were using a tampon. I went on the trip anyway, in faith and praying fervently that something would happen to allow me to participate in the ordinances. I remember falling to my knees in gratitude when the temple president granted me permission to still do the baptisms. To me, it was a miracle and a bedrock experience of my young testimony. With the perspective of 30 years, I see lots of things that should have been different about that situation. We may think we've solved some of the ways a young girl asking an older man for permission to use a tampon was wrong. But one thing that hasn't changed is the potential for individual decision makers to shape the outcome of seemingly banal situations that have much larger repercussions on young testimonies. Although I continue to believe deeply in the power of administrative changes to introduce our community to a more equitable, sustainable, and holier way of doing things, they alone do not eradicate the pervasive gender bias that informs everything from how we perceive God to how we lead a meeting. Our fundamental preoccupation with gender and its determinate nature here on earth and in the hereafter is affecting our membership retention rates, our missionary efforts, the unity of our families, the potential for women and men to fully experience the challenges and blessings of this life, and the shepherding of our children. And yet, I am here. You are here. Why? Why do I remain sacrificially committed to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, even when it breaks my heart? Why do you? And perhaps more importantly, how do we do it? As a woman, it is holy but painful work to disentangle the gospel of Jesus Christ from the sexist practices that shape church participation. It's never easy, but I have a lot of practice at this point navigating my commitment to Jesus Christ with my engagement in the institutional church. And in my best moments, when I am able to take off the lens of womanhood that colors so much of my church experience, I see so much beauty. I see the echoes of rituals that have existed for thousands of years, connecting me to others who have striven for something beyond this mortal life. I see people who I would never seek out otherwise, stretching me to develop kindness and warmth that doesn't come naturally to me. I see people aspiring to healthy, happy families, and as the only child of a single mother, I deeply admire and try to emulate that. From my perspective inside the church, I see that being told that wifehood and motherhood mean nothing is just as damaging as being told that wifehood and motherhood mean everything. I am, however, uniquely privileged to have the tools I need to shape my womanhood in fullness outside of the church. When confronted with that balance between obedience and personal revelation, I absolutely favor my agency more often than others may be comfortable with. I was raised in New York City by a woman who thrived in her professional career. I have always been encouraged to develop my academic skills, my business skills, my musical skills to a level that was never hindered by concepts of womanhood. And from my perspective as someone comfortable in the outside world, I can see that being told wifehood and motherhood mean everything is just as damaging as being told wifehood and motherhood mean nothing. For my entire life, my church membership has been one of only several pillars that have shaped my choices and sense of self. I've differentiated myself from my church membership in consistent and important ways. It's allowed me to choose faith, to choose the kind of member I want to be, and for that I am extraordinarily grateful. In contrast, Latter-day Saint women generally are coming out of generations of expectations that have consciously and subconsciously stripped us collectively of those self-actualizing and differentiating skills. In a minute, it will be my pleasure to invite my friend and brilliant therapist, Valerie Hamaker, to join me on stage to spend more time leaning into what those skills can look like for ourselves. My dearest hope is for Latter-day Saint women to be given the structural and emotional support to actualize themselves fully outside of any prescribed roles. So in the spirit of restoring this weekend, let's welcome the opportunity to wrestle with the great unfinished work of the restoration. Let's put fear aside. Let's build that bridge between blind acceptance of patriarchy and leaving our community altogether. Let's prepare our own hearts so that when we are given a different way, a higher way to interact as men and women, we are ready for it. We rejoice when it comes because it will feel so inevitable, so right. This collective work within our community is vital. Your participation here is vital. As author Jim Quick says, life is like an egg. If it is broken by an outside force, life ends. But if it is broken from the inside, life begins. The same is true for the church. Great things begin on the inside. Thank you.